So here is my analysis. Several themes emerge from the book, and I'll be careful not to reveal major spoilers here. Just a reminder. But I will reference some of the historical details and some of the minor details mentioned in the book. If discussion of themes will spoil the book for you, I recommend turning back now and perhaps watching this video at another time. I mentioned in other episodes that I would eventually like to include more literary analysis on this channel. I still plan on conducting reviews and discussing book culture and other things that I discussed last year, but I'd like to focus a tad bit more on reading deeply. That is a goal for this new year. Let's try an experiment with this popular novel and conduct a short analysis. The goal is to present a perspective on the book that may prompt dialogue with what you see in the text. Of course, some viewers may wonder if a novel about dragons and curses is a good novel for a literary analysis. After all, it doesn't seem to be a very difficult, or for that matter, literary book. So why spend time on it? Certainly, I see the value of reading that challenges us, and there will be plenty of that in this channel and on BookTube. But, and I ask this question directly to our community, don't you think it's important to examine the content where our minds spend most time? That is popular culture. In addition to reading the best which has been thought and said, as Matthew Arnold said, shouldn't we also develop a more conscious understanding of the popular culture we consume? We spend so much time letting messages just wash over us, especially when we are constantly being bombarded through screens, news media, social media, etc. Perhaps we should be looking a little more closely at the values and claims of the messages we consume when our brains are at their most passive. Well, starting with this very popular novel, King Sorrow, let's begin with the thesis and then go into the supporting analysis for the claim. However, to be clear, other reasonable theses can exist on the same text, which is so exciting about reading. Every text is enriched when we engage with multiple viewpoints. I would be absolutely overjoyed to see other readings on King Sorrow. The language and ideas are very accessible, so really anyone can do this. You just have to be willing to look more deeply into a text. First, let's briefly look at a question. What is literary analysis exactly? It's not a book review, it's not a book report. So the focus is not to remark on the quality of the work. Rather, the goal is to provide readers with an assessment of its meaning and significance. Literary works are both expressions of art and language and artifacts that give us a view into a culture of a particular place and time. A person's reading of a work is meant to express their implicit and reasonable inferences in the most explicit terms possible. I had a professor sum this up by giving us a motto: make the implicit explicit. Tell us what you see with specificity and detail. The hope is that readers come away with insights that reorient their perspective and signal a broader significance of the text. The main thesis for this analysis is here. King Sorrow ventures into well worn topics like love and redemption, class conflict, political antagonism, and mental health. But it also offers an interesting look at how American society avoided the weight of its collective trauma. By intermingling the supernatural and fantastic with the real world, it exposed the major cost of decades of political and social evasion. The novel's parallels between the dragon's curse and real historical traumas show readers a way to see in a new light events like the rise of surveillance technologies, reactions to 9/11, America's involvement in several wars, financial instability over the years, and the political radicalization instigated through bespoke media silos. These revolving crises have left a legacy of American dread. Let's break this down and look at what is intended by our keyword dread, because I think this is a concept that is important for the novel's central tone. First, the word dread refers to a prolonged anticipation of an imminent threat, especially when the source of terror is elusive or difficult to define. That definition is inspired by Christine Freeland. Check the citation in the description. As described by Freud in The Uncanny, this kind of fear often triggers untargeted and deep seated emotional reactions, like we see from the friends in this story. On this subject, a whole swath of cultural critics have declared that the collective feelings about national and global crises like these have provoked a broader sense of prolonged American anxiety. This is where the book comes in. King Sorrow's curse on the main characters is a statement on and manifestation of this kind of fear. Many sources have explored America's collective traumas. I've cited these sources in the description, and they are worth reviewing. Several of these scholars have written about the connections between pervasive anxiety and technology. Even more books have specifically looked at connections between recent large scale crises and collective trauma. Finally, a large number of recent polls and studies on American moods have likewise found pervasive dread in Americans' outlook. In each case, the sources discovered a profound sense of fear in the national temperament. Our next question is, so, how does this sense of dread show up in King Sorrow? As observed through the historical view in the book, the last few decades may be characterized by a series of crises, some dramatic and some gradual, whose resulting traumas, like the book's curse, have remained unresolved. Rather than confronting these issues, America has made deals with dragons to defer or distance the consequences, with similar effects as the six friends from the novel. An early scene in the book makes the connection between King Sorrow and social crises explicit. As the friends reconcile their part in a recent killing, one character says this: I'll say it anyway. None of us, the six of us in this room, directly killed anyone in Biafra. But our country did. The CIA did. They did it for us so we could live in peace and security, because most of the good things in our lives were purchased with blood. We didn't think about it, but any number of things we enjoy and take for granted, starting first and foremost with each other, are held at the cost of other lives. We make peace with a certain level of horror. Pardon all the ellipses, but this quote stretches over a whole page. Now, in the context of the scene, the speaker views King Sorrow as a mixed blessing, and therefore, his comparison with the CIA is actually high praise for an institution who handles death as the cost for the quote, good things in our lives. The character's statement is incongruous given the dragon's violence from the preceding pages. The other five characters at the time are perceivably repulsed by the speech, and the tone lands decidedly on the side of disgust. Their reactions foretell eventual moral and interpersonal conflicts that unwind their lives. As the levels of dread surge in subsequent years, deep fissures develop in each character's mental state, and what begins here as panic and terror shifts to years of intense fear and anxiety. This chapter is first among many others that also play contemporary American crises in the background, under the narrative. The rest of the novel is organized into sections called books, which are subdivided in typically short but pointed chapters. These divisions bracket King Sorrow into episodes, which loosely represent phases of the characters' lives. There is a distinct college phase, post college 90s phase, several aughts episodes, and so on. However, and here is an important point, the organization also corresponds roughly but noticeably to significant cultural and political eras in recent American history. The first book in the 80s exposes a break in the Friends' youthful optimism, which turns to the darker cynicism of the 90s. Remember, for example, Alanis Morissette, gangster rap, and grunge from the early to mid 90s? Good music, but I don't think anybody would call it happy tunes. The fourth book begins roughly in 2006 when internet slash mobile technology and tech billionaireism really kicks off into high gear. The era's tech optimism takes on a dark irony in the novel when viewed through the lens of today's industry failures. The novel progresses through other moments in the past that may feel uncannily familiar. This is not just a dragon's tale. Hill's organization and tone binds his characters' lives to the most cynical milestones of the past. I mentioned that I would try to keep this short, so just one last point. In the thesis, I claimed that the narrative paralleled American Dread with decades of the character's horror story, and that it allegorized the perils of avoidance. Here is the part about the dangers of evasion, and I'm going to have to get a little vague in parts to avoid major spoilers. However, I think you'll get the gist. For readers of the novel's first section or book, you will likely already become keenly aware of the character's personal flaws. These are, of course, exacerbated later on as they sink into personal crutches. Their substance abuse and other personal challenges are deeply connected to entrenched social issues. The story highlights, for example, the evolution of sexuality, widening class divisions, political radicalism, tech surveillance, as well as militarism and the war on terror. Each character's life is an expression of at least one of these issues. And the growing conflict in the novel is not just that a dragon wants to eat them, but that their worsening social and cultural obstacles are, in a way, as big as King Sorrow himself. You may recognize some of the issues from that last list as the major conflicts of our past. This is no mistake because, again, the characters function allegorically. They are representations of a view of the American past characterized by reactions to national crises. Without giving anything away, only when the characters confront and address these failures does the novel begin to mark a possible resolution. Why should we care about this? Why should we care about King Sorrow? Hill's novel is an invitation for self examination of a country's social, cultural, and political choices from about the last 35 years or so. As historian Heather Cox Richardson said, our current situation is a culmination of several decades of politics. In a moment that I know feels chaotic, in a moment that feels like we want to look away from the horror, Some good old introspection may not only be a way to confront personal dragons, but it may also be how we can take our first steps and make choices for a country, culture, politics, and structural change that leads us to healthier connections with our communities and, in fact, each other. Even when we read horror, books can give us a permission structure to rethink our present and our future. Thank you for listening. I'm Ben from Tilting at Tomes. Please like and subscribe to support this channel, and watch out for dragons.